Trump's second term in office has begun with a flurry of dramatic shifts, both in Washington, D.C. and in U.S. foreign policy. From imposing steeper tariffs on Canada than on China, and suggesting a U.S. occupation of Gaza, to floating the idea of annexing Greenland and reaching out to Russian President Vladimir Putin in an attempt to end the war in Ukraine, the rapid changes are both overwhelming and strategic. While these moves may not be the most shocking aspects of his second administration, Trump's tariff policies could prove to be among the most consequential, particularly in shaping domestic economic conditions and reinforcing his Make America Great Again agenda. However, these tariffs may ultimately undermine his broader objectives due to their unintended consequences on the U.S. dollar. With manufacturing costs in the U.S. already significantly higher than in Europe and Asia, the immediate impact of tariffs and the uncertainty they introduce will likely fuel inflation expectations while also strengthening the U.S. dollar against other major currencies. Although a stronger dollar might typically help curb inflation, the added costs associated with tariffs could offset this benefit. Furthermore, while central banks in the UK and the Eurozone are proceeding with rate cuts to stimulate their economies amid trade tensions, the U.S. Federal Reserve has paused its own rate-cutting cycle, prioritizing inflation concerns over economic stimulus.
Expectations for U.S. assets will only further strengthen the dollar. For so long, global demand for the U.S. currency has meant that its primary export has been its currency and related financial products. This unique, exorbitant privilege is what has enabled Washington to run both trade and fiscal deficits without any major drag on the economy. Trump has increasingly realized the importance of protecting this system, threatening 100% tariffs and other action against countries that seek to de-dollarize and embrace the Russia and China-backed BRICS organization. Business and economy. Trump's tariffs may end up blowing up the U.S. dollar hegemony. Some of the U.S. president's most daring policies to make America great again may inflict irreparable harm to the U.S. economy. Maximilian Hess, fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, published on March 13, 2025. March 13, 2025, Irish Taoiseach, Prime Minister Michel Martin, visits Washington. Trump is trying to reorder the international monetary system to the U.S. benefit. But so far, his actions signal that his understanding of it is sophomoric at best, writes Hess, Evelyn Hochstein/Reuters. United States President Donald Trump's second term in office has launched with a whirlwind of changes to the status quo in Washington, D.C., and to U.S. relations with the world. The rapid pace of departures from the norm, from targeting Canada, the U.S.'s most steadfast ally, with larger tariffs than China, and floating the U.S. occupation of Gaza, to the threat to annex Greenland and the decision to reach out to Russian President Vladimir Putin to try to end the war in Ukraine, is overwhelming, and intentionally so. Trump's tariffs may not be the most shocking foreign policy overture of his second administration, but they may well end up being the most consequential in the long run. Like all his headline-generating foreign policy moves, his plan for tariffs is also part of his overreaching game plan to reshape the U.S. economy. He says he will be imposing tariffs on Europe, China, and everyone else that trades with the U.S. to bring manufacturing back home and make America great again. But in this instance, Trump's boldness is unlikely to bring him closer to his long-term goals due to the inadvertent impact these tariffs will eventually have on the U.S. dollar. Manufacturing costs in the U.S. are far higher than they are even in Europe, let alone Asia, and thus the immediate effect of his tariffs and threats of tariffs would inevitably be to raise inflation expectations, as well as begin a new cycle of U.S. dollar strength versus other leading currencies. While it may seem that a stronger dollar would weaken inflation, tariffs, and the threat thereof add additional costs to trade, which minimize this potential benefit. Additionally, the U.S. Federal Reserve has paused its rate-cutting cycle even as other top central banks, such as the Bank of England and the European Central Bank, push ahead with their cuts, as their fears of renewed inflation have been supplanted by the need to stimulate growth in the face of trade threats. The structure of the international monetary system in which the U.S. dollar already dominates, however, means that higher yield expectations for U.S. assets will only further strengthen the dollar.